The Search for Land, Gold, and a New Life by Cynthia Clampett. More land, more people. In the 1800s, the United States was growing. People continued to arrive from other lands, but more than just the population was expanding. The size of the country also increased as more territories were gained. By 1850, the United States stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Many people had come to the United States to escape poverty in Europe, only to find themselves still trapped in poverty in the cities of the eastern United States. They dreamed of having farms and building homes. Others dreamed of finding gold, a less reliable dream than farming, but possibly a quicker road to prosperity. Following these dreams changed people's lives and the United States. The country's growth was caused by more than dreams, however. Many Americans had begun to believe it was the nation's manifest destiny to grow. More land meant greater strength for the country and fewer borders to protect. It meant more opportunities for the poor and the immigrants who continued to arrive. Also, part of the West was a land of freedom for escaped enslaved people. The West had to be opened up. Hundreds of thousands of people were depending on it. Unfortunately, this expansion had a cost. American Indians were often pushed aside as newcomers laid claim to traditional land, or gold miners took over waterways. Also, thousands of people died on the trails or during conflicts. However, these hardships did not stop people's dreams and hopes that the United States should grow and that anyone could succeed here. Opening up the West. Before people could head west, the land had to be explored, and trails had to be blazed or marked. It was the mountain men who opened up the West. The mountain men were fur trappers, traders, and scouts. They made the unexplored regions their home. They blazed the great western trails and created interest in this new land with their stories of vast forests and fertile valleys. Mountain man John Colter traveled with Lewis and Clark before becoming a trapper and scout. He traveled on foot through the mountains in the area that is now Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. In 1807, he became the first American to see the area American Indians called Yellowstone. His tales of boiling mud and geysers shooting into the air were not believed. People thought he had lost his mind. Jedediah Smith was part of a group that opened a passage to the Northwest in 1824. In 1826, Smith found a westward route to California. He and the traders he was leading became the first Americans to enter California from the east. Smith was also the first American to reach present-day Oregon by traveling up the Pacific coast. Smith's adventures were often dangerous. He nearly died of thirst in the desert, and he was almost killed by a grizzly bear. He survived several attacks by American Indians, but was finally killed by the Comanche in the southwest. Jim Bridger's name lives on in the Bridger Range in Montana, Bridger Pass in southern Wyoming, and the Bridger-Teton National Forest in western Wyoming. Bridger explored the territory ranging from the Canadian border to New Mexico. Jim Beckworth was the son of an enslaved African-American woman. He headed west when he was given his freedom. A pass he found through the Sierra Nevada later became part of the Overland Trail to California. Kit Carson was a mountain man who became a folk hero. Carson joined a group of trappers and frontiersmen while he was still a teenager. He became a scout for the United States military. In 1854, he was appointed to be an American Indian agent and became well known for his fairness and sympathy for the problems faced by American Indians. The days of the mountain men were over by about 1850. By this time the West had been opened up. Trails had been blazed to Oregon and California, and people who were not explorers were now heading west. Settling the Pacific Northwest. John Jacob Astor thought that opening a trading post in the Pacific Northwest would increase his business. He bought furs and shipped them to Asia, where there was a great demand for them. He opened his trading post in 1811 at the mouth of the Columbia River. The British, however, controlled most of the fur trade in the region, and his trading post failed. Increased activity by British fur traders worried the United States government. However, in 1818 the two countries agreed to share the part of the Northwest known as Oregon Country. This area included all of present-day Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and parts of Montana, Wyoming, and British Columbia. In 1819, the United States and Spain signed a treaty setting Oregon's southern border, and Spain agreed not to settle Oregon. Many settlers went west, including Marcus Whitman, a young doctor, and his wife, Narcissa Prentice Whitman. In 1836, the Whitmans set up a mission near present-day Walla Walla, Washington. They taught the Cayuse how to build houses, plow fields, irrigate crops, and build mills to grind corn and wheat. Narcissa started a school for local children. Dr. Whitman cared for the Cayuse, as well as missionaries and other people in the region. In 1842, the Whitmans learned that their assignment was going to end. Marcus Whitman made a 3,000-mile journey on horseback to Boston to ask that their work be continued. He also traveled to Washington, D.C., to ask federal officials to encourage settlement in Oregon. As Whitman returned to Oregon Country in 1843, he joined a group of nearly 1,000 immigrants who were headed west. He guided their wagon train across the country, and it was because of his efforts that they succeeded in crossing the mountains to the Columbia River. This event became known as the Great Migration. This Great Migration convinced many people that the Oregon Trail was safe. By the mid-1840s, 6,000 settlers had moved to Oregon Country. With so many people moving to the region, the United States and Great Britain reconsidered their agreement about Oregon Country. The British suggested that the northern border of Oregon be set at the same latitude as the rest of the United States and the Canadian border. This decision encouraged many more Americans to move west. Wagon trains of as many as 100 covered wagons were soon crossing the continent. Families loaded all their possessions into these wagons before leaving on the 2,000-mile journey, which could take between 4 and 6 months to complete. While on the Oregon Trail, the trail that led from Independence, Missouri to Oregon Country, people usually kept a regular schedule. They rose at 4 a.m. and departed by 7 a.m. The wagon train would travel until 4 p.m. and then would stop so the travelers could prepare meals, make repairs, and feed their horses and cattle. Children could play once their chores were done, and violins or guitars were sometimes brought out to provide entertainment. Mountains and rivers were difficult to cross. Thunderstorms, strong winds, and snow could make traveling even more difficult and dangerous. Contaminated water or food often caused sickness. Many people died, but the promise of a new life and the possibility of escaping poverty made people push onward. During the 1840s, about 12,000 people used the Oregon Trail to reach the Pacific Northwest. Of all the great overland routes to the west, the Oregon Trail was used the longest. A difficult time for Mexico. The 1800s were a time of disorder and uncertainty in Mexico. In 1821, an army led by Agustin de Iturbide and Vicente Guerrero took control of most of Mexico. Spain sent a new military governor, but it was too late to regain control. A treaty was signed on August 24, 1821, that gave Mexico its independence from Spain. Iturbide crowned himself Emperor of Mexico in 1822, and the United States gave formal recognition to the Mexican Empire. The military, headed by Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, revolted against the emperor in 1823. Iturbide was forced from power, and in 1824 he was arrested and shot. Santa Anna declared that Mexico was now a republic. Men were given the right to vote, but government protections were removed for native peoples, who were now worse off than under Spanish rule. Different military groups fought for control, and the government changed hands every year or two. Mexico's debts skyrocketed. In 1833, Santa Anna again took control of Mexico's government, this time as president. Santa Anna adopted a new constitution in 1836, one that eliminated states' rights. The people most affected by this were the 30,000 United States immigrants who had settled in the Mexican-held area known as Texas. When the Texans revolted, Santa Anna crushed the first group he encountered at the Alamo in February 1836. Santa Anna's army was then defeated by Sam Houston's troops in April 1836, and Santa Anna was captured. In exchange for his freedom, Santa Anna promised not to try to recapture Texas. However, he refused to recognize Texas's independence, and when the United States annexed Texas in 1845, the Mexican people removed Santa Anna from power because he had been willing to negotiate with the United States. The two countries could not agree on the southern boundary of Texas. President James Polk tried to make peace by offering $30 million to Mexico for New Mexico and California. Mexico needed the money badly, but refused. United States troops who were protecting the southern border of Texas were attacked by Mexican troops in April 1846. Polk saw this as an act of war, and the Mexican War began. The war lasted until February 1848. The treaty that ended the war gave the United States a vast territory that included most of the American Southwest. It also gave Mexico $15 million and granted citizenship to the 75,000 Mexicans living in the Southwest. Going for the gold. In early 1848, a carpenter from New Jersey named James Wilson Marshall picked up some yellow pebbles in a California stream. The pebbles were gold. John Sutter, a rancher from Switzerland, owned the land where the gold was found. Sutter knew that news of the discovery could ruin everything he had built because people would come by the thousands and overrun his land. He asked his workers to tell no one, but the news leaked out anyway. There were no telephones or telegraphs, so the news spread slowly at first. One friend told another friend, and everyone who had heard about it headed for Sutter's land. By March 1848, several newspapers had published the story of Marshall's discovery. The news electrified the country and sped around the world. California had never attracted large numbers of people. Much of the state was dry, with little of the fertile land that drew farmers to Oregon. It was mountainous and hard to reach. During the Mexican War, Mexico had hardly bothered to defend California. Now suddenly everyone wanted to go there. The gold rush was on. As gold fever took hold, people left their homes and their jobs. Stores and schools were closed, and farms were abandoned. In 1 year, 80,000 men flooded into California. Sutter's fears proved correct, and within a few months his land was covered with tents and was being torn up by miners' picks and shovels. The first prospectors, or people who came searching for gold, were called 49ers because they arrived in 1849. There were prospectors of many different nationalities, and most of those who arrived in 1849 were men. Life in the gold fields was not pleasant. Most miners lived in small tents, and there were few services such as doctors or barbers. Without any laws, government, or police, mining camps were often dangerous places. Few people wanted to expose wives or daughters to these hardships, though a few women did make the trip, and some even came to search for gold. Life was also hard for the region's American Indians. Some joined the rush for gold, but many were driven off by hostile prospectors. Those who stayed found their lands and waterways ruined as digging continued. Californios, the Hispanics who lived in California before it became part of the United States, also found their land overrun. Losing their land and livelihood would create problems for the Californios for decades after the gold rush ended. By 1853, a total of 250,000 fortune seekers had arrived in California, which had become a state in 1850. By that time, many prospectors had left for the big gold rush in Australia in 1851. Many people who were disappointed by their lack of success moved back east. However, California continued to grow as settlers replaced the miners. The gold rush was over, but California was just getting started.